Hello, it's Helen from Journal with Purpose and welcome to my latest video. I'm so excited to share this one with you as it's part of a collaboration which is being hosted by Joey DeFee and involves lots of other fantastic creative journaling YouTubers, and I'll leave links to their YouTube channels all in the description box down below. So this video is going to be all about the kinds of projects that bring me joy in the hope that it gives you some ideas for your junk journal during 2021. So this is the junk journal I'm going to be working in, which is one I created here on YouTube a little while ago. And one of my favourite things to do in my junk journal is to use those vintage pages but also bring some bright splashes of colour. And one of the things I've been asked about lots is how I created this cover page, because I didn't film this, but I thought that would be a great way to kickstart maybe some new ideas and give you some ways to bring some lovely splashes of colour into your junk journal pages. So the main supplies I'm going to be using are some watercolour paints, and absolutely any brand would do. And I'm also going to be using some acrylic gesso. If you don't have gesso, you could use some white acrylic paint. As long as it's quite thick, you might just need to use a couple of layers on your pages. For gesso, I always recommend using some older brushes that you're not too worried about, because it can really stiffen them up over time. I'll be using a large watercolour brush. This is from Skoda brushes and is size 8. I'll also be using a mixing palette for my paint, a pencil and a black pen. And for this I'm using a Sakura Micron Pigma pen, but any kind of black pen and pencil will be absolutely fine. So I'm going to be creating something like this but in a completely different theme, so I really hope you enjoy the video and I'm going to get started. As you can see inside my junk journal, along with lots of writing spots, I really like to include places for some mini art journaling projects. So things that aren't too technically difficult but just add some lovely splashes of colour. The first thing I'm going to do is pour some of the gesso onto this ceramic plate. And I'm going to use that on the map page in my junk journal. I'm then going to use an old flat paintbrush to apply the gesso to my page, and I'm going to paint a rectangle over the top of the map. But I'm going to leave the edges of the page showing, because I always like to still have that hint of the journal page that was behind it. And gesso is great for having an opaque layer that you can paint on top of. It may well take a couple of layers depending on how thickly you apply it and how bright the colours are underneath. As I mentioned, if you don't have any gesso, then you could definitely try this with some thick white acrylic paint. And you want to make sure that you haven't got too many lumps in it, but equally it doesn't have to be perfect either. Whilst that gesso layer is drying, I'm going to start mixing up 3 different watercolour paint colours that I want to use. And you can pick any different colours that you like. I've just tried to pick some pretty colours that I know will look really nice with each other on the page. The watercolour set that I'm using is from London Gifties, but any kind of quality or brand of watercolour paints will work absolutely fine for this project. And you may have noticed I've got a brand new mixing palette which I'm really excited about. This one was given to me by my sister for Christmas and it came from Jackson's Art. My last palette was plastic and it got so messy over the years, and it's really lovely to be using this new palette. You'll notice that I'm mixing in lots of water with these paints because I want to make sure I've got a nice coverage all over my page and that they're really wet and will run into each other. I'm now going to start applying these colours on top of the gesso. And if you haven't painted on top of gesso before, you'll notice it's really interesting to work on. Because with normal paper, some of your paint will absorb into the page, and this just sits right on top of the gesso. So it will take quite a while to dry, but you get all of those really interesting brush strokes and texture from the gesso underneath. And there's no particular kind of form or placing that I'm going for with these paints. I'm just making sure that I've got a good mixture of all of the colours right on top. And if you find that any of the kind of white spots are showing through, you can always go back and add some more of your watercolour paint on top. I love how this background's come out so much. I was almost tempted to just leave it as it was, and that's definitely something you could do. If you just wanted some bright splashes of colour, you could just stop at this point and leave that lovely background on your journal page. Later on in the video, I'm going to be adding some writing onto this right-hand page. And as I wanted to tie them in together, I'm adding some splashes of the same paint that I used all over the top of the page. And this is another one of my favourite ways to just add some really quick and easy colour onto my journal pages. The next thing I'm going to do is sketch a really simple house onto my page. And I'm using my book as inspiration, but if you don't have that, you could either copy exactly the same house that I'm doing, or you could even try and draw an outline of your own house. And I'm only going to be keeping it really simple. So to start with, I'm sketching out the outline of the house using a Derwent precision pencil. That's to make sure I've got a good outline, and I want to make sure that it's quite big so that as much of it as possible is on top of that watercolour paint. You of course don't need to stick with a house theme. You could do anything like florals that I did on the front cover, or mandalas, feathers, dream catchers, absolutely anything you like. I'm now using a Sakura Pigma Micron pen to go over the top of that penciled outline. I've also added a moon to the top of my page, and there's a really simple tree on the right hand side too. And the reason I went with the home theme is because in the UK we're back in another lockdown. I really wanted to try and celebrate the positives about being at home and think about all of the fun things I can do while we're here. Now that I've added my black outlines, I'm going to apply gesso again on top of the watercolour outside of all of the inked images. And don't worry when you're doing this if you go over some of those black lines a little bit, because you can always come back and ink them in again later, like I'll be doing, to tidy up those lines. And again, this stage can take a little while. You can see that my paint's still showing through quite clearly on that first layer, so I'll be adding a couple of layers of the gesso on top. And I'm using a slightly smaller flat brush for this. I think one of the reasons I love creating this type of page so much is the results are always really unpredictable. When you first start adding that watercolour paint down, you're not quite sure what's still going to be visible, but you get that lovely loose watercolour effect that would be much harder to do if you were painting just inside the image you've sketched. I'm also applying some gesso inside the windows of my house because I want to be able to come back and add another colour to those later on, because I want to add some yellow to make it look like the lights are on inside the house to give it that really cosy feel. With my junk journal this year, I really want to use it as a fun place to experiment with different styles, and I love all of the vintage pages and adding sewn elements, pockets and tags, but I also really want to try out different art journaling skills. I find it's much less intimidating somehow than starting with a completely blank page in an art journal or sketchbook, and I really just see it as part of kind of exploring and my own journey. Now that the gesso is completely dry, I'm adding some yellow watercolour paint directly from the pan into the windows. And I'm also then going to add some orange to let those paints play together but give a really soft glow to the windows. At the moment, I'm really enjoying working on anything which really requires my concentration and takes a little time to complete, because I find it really absorbs me, and that's just so helpful at the moment. Now that the watercolour paint is dry as well as the gesso, I'm going to go back and add those outlines, especially where the gesso's gone slightly over the edge, and that will really help your images to stand out against the white background. If you do decide to give this a try and you share your pages on Instagram, please do tag me in at Journal with Purpose. I would absolutely love to see them and share them with everybody else. The next thing I'm going to do is tear a sheet out of this invoice notepad, and I'm going to add a quote on top of it. And I'll be using a Tombow Fudenosuke brush pen with a firm nib for this. And the quote that I'll be adding is "Fun at home." One thing I always really try to do in my journals is reset my thinking and bring myself back to a place of positivity. As much as I was initially really disappointed by the news that we'd be back in lockdown again, I really just wanted to try and change that thinking to all of the things that I can do whilst I'm safe at home. So that's very much the theme of these journal pages, and something that I do on most of them is I might start off with some negative thoughts and feelings, but I try and use my journal to switch that around into more of a positive. I'm now tearing that piece of paper down to the right size, and I'll be using some Pritt Stick to glue it to the top of my page. And I really like adding some quick headings, because when I flick through my journals I can quickly see what kind of things were going on and what I was focusing on at that time. Next, I'm going to tear up another sheet of paper, and I'm going to use this to create a writing spot on my right hand page. And again, I want to tear it down so that I can still see that really lovely book page underneath it. Again, I'll be using Pritt Stick to glue this onto my page. Once I've stuck the piece of paper down, I'll be using some washi tape from London Gifties, just for a little bit of extra decoration, and I love the way the colours on the tape tied in with the watercolour paint that I'd used. And as always, for any shops or products that I've mentioned in this video, I will leave them linked in the description box down below. On this piece of paper, I'm going to be noting down some of the things that I'm really excited to be working on over the next few months. And this includes things like finishing my knitting project. If you follow my Instagram stories, you might see that I got a knitting kit for Christmas for a scarf, and I haven't knitted really since I was at school, so it's been a huge learning curve for me, but I'm really enjoying it. I also want to learn how to crochet. I want to take some more online classes, try out some new recipes, finish a whole sketchbook and play loads of family games. I thought that was a really nice way to celebrate some of the good things about being at home. For my writing, I'm using a black Muji gel pen, and I'm going to finish off my pages by drawing a border around the quote and adding a stamp to the bottom of my page. I want to say a huge thank you to Joey Defee for including me in this collaboration, and please do check out all of the other participants who are going to be sharing some of their favourite projects to create in their junk journals. And I've been absolutely blown away by the variety and the different projects that they've created. They're just so inspiring, and I'm sure if you have a look, you'll get loads of ideas for your journals for the new year. One of my favourite things about being part of this journaling community is that it's so full of kind and inspiring people who are all there ready to lift each other up and support each other. And I just think that's just been so wonderful, especially during last year and going into this one. I really hope that you've enjoyed watching this video and that you're doing well. If you have enjoyed the video, it'd be great if you'd leave it with a thumbs up. And if you're new to my channel, I would love it if you consider subscribing. If you've got any questions or comments, as always, please do leave them down below. I also want to say a massive thank you to everybody who's supporting me over on Patreon. I really appreciate you. Thank you ever so much for watching. I look forward to speaking with you really soon in the next one.